Well, yesterday's events capped off a difficult year for Asian Americans and Canadians, the community seeing a rise in verbal and physical abuse since the pandemic began. And that conversation comes amid a racial reckoning in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. Communities of color have been leading the calls to end systemic racism, and one expert in racial identity and trauma says that it can take a toll on mental health. Linda Lin is a counselor with a focus on racial identity and racial trauma, and she joins us from Vancouver tonight. Hi, Linda. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Linda, I have to say, I didn't know that a job like yours even existed. It's been a heavy year for many reasons between the pandemic and all of these conversations around race. Have you seen an increase in clients coming to talk to you specifically about how racism has taken a toll on their mental health?
Oh, yes, for sure. I am coming close with a wait list. And I'm seeing so much of my therapist colleagues who are also trying to heal the wounds of so many who are struggling in not just the pandemic, but also the racialized trauma that have been just awakening in our society.
So you specialize in racialized trauma. You just use that word. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so I would say that racial trauma are overwhelming experiences based on oppression, discrimination, rejection. It could be prejudice towards one's race, which one can't change. It can be intergenerational. For example, children of immigrants like myself, we see our parents sacrifice, struggle, and suffering as we were growing up. And we are all just trying to translate and also protect them and their stories and trying to represent our parents growing up as well.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask, how does, people deal with many mental health issues that don't have to do with their race, but how important is it to understand the intersection of race and mental health?
Yeah, I would say that Asian or any racial trauma that we see, there are so many myths that oppress us. For example, there's this model minority myth, which a lot of us are trying to dismantle. That myth that Asians don't face real racism, that they're privileged and are basically white, which leads Asians like me to believe, is my trauma not being seen as a problem here? Can I even take space? And that, again, is when our problems are not seen as problems, that creates trauma, right? So these racialized aggressions keep being minimalized in the society, and that creates trauma as well.
So what are some ways, and when you deal with clients, when you talk to them about ways that they can cope or deal with some of that racial trauma that you described, what are some coping mechanisms that you advise?
I would say take lots of time and space to grieve all of this heaviness. You're also in a pandemic. Talk about it if you can with people you trust. Advocate for yourself. Check in with yourself and your community if possible. Take lots of frequent digital breaks like I am doing right now. You can even unpack and explore with a therapist who can offer you that non-judgmental approach in that space. Speak up and take up space too. You deserve it.
And how can family members and friends support people who might be, their mental health has taken a toll, not just, this week, but this year, given all of the conversations that we're having around race?
Yeah, I would say with the pandemic going on for about a year now, we're all really feeling that exhaustion and all feeling helplessness, right? So contact each other virtually is even getting harder too. So we can remind ourselves that it's not about fixing or solving someone's trauma, but we're just trying to listen, actively listen, and show up with empathy, and that is enough.
And, talk to me also about the fact that, you have a wait list. So are you trying to encourage other therapists to consider this in their work?
Yes, I would say that the BIPOC community have been so amazing. They've been creating resources and directories to connect a client going through racialized trauma, to connect them with a therapist who also specializes in racial trauma. There's directories like Healing in Color and Asian Mental Health Collective, and that makes therapy accessible for people dealing with this.
All right, Linda Lin is a counselor with a focus on racial identity and racial trauma. She is in Vancouver. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.